there, welcome to Anatomical Gangster. I'm your host, Sue Hitzman. Thanks for joining me today to listen to what I think will be an insightful conversation for those of you who deal with some type of chronic pain. In this podcast, I'm talking to David Weinstock. He's been practicing and teaching manual therapy techniques since 1973. He was a pre-med student at Johns Hopkins University, and early in his career, he traveled to Central and South America and also learned from native healers and a variety of practitioners. In 1985, David co-founded the Institute of Conscious Bodywork in Marin County, California, where he developed his method, NeuroKinetic Therapy bodywork system. David's book, NeuroKinetic Therapy, an innovative approach to manual muscle testing, was published in 2010. I came upon David's work about a decade ago, and I've taken some of his courses and find his method hands down one of the best ways to muscle test to help pinpoint compensation and restore muscle timing in clients with chronic joint pain. In this conversation, he shares some of his concepts and what's missing in most therapeutic protocols. He also talks about how he addresses acute and chronic issues and strategies that most people might not even consider. David is not only a colleague and a teacher of mine, he's a friend. I'm always honored when he takes time to chat with me, so I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Remember, if you enjoy this session, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. And here is David Weinstock. So David, thank you so much for coming on Anatomical Gangster and chatting with me. Of course, I've been a fan of your work for forever. I feel like since the beginning of time. And I don't know if everybody really understands what neurokinetic therapy is, but it's one of the best assessment tools that I think I have in my toolbox, from both taking your first course, a level 1 course, but also just in your books, which are very comprehensive and really give people a lot of information. But I'd be curious if first, maybe let's have you explain what is neurokinetic therapy, and of course, how on earth you devised it. How did you get to where you are, right?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Neurokinetic means brain movement therapy. So it's how the brain organizes movement in the body. And when there's a dysfunction, then the tools from the neurokinetic therapy protocol allow the practitioner to unravel the puzzle of the dysfunction and then give somebody homework based on those findings, so that when they do their therapeutic exercises, they are specific rehabilitation exercises assigned to them, not spit out by a computer program. So we like the specificity of it. It empowers people to take care of themselves rather than being reliant on the practitioner. And frankly, it's anti-Western medicine philosophy of physical rehabilitation.
So well said on all of that. And I think something I hope everybody hears, because this was sort of when I was in the mid 90s, when I was really kind of, I'm doing exercise physiology, I'm learning from school, from collegiate work, and I got introduced to Leon Chaitau's work, and he's talking about the right position and the right angle with the right amount of pressure. You're going to then be able to test and assess if muscles are actually, the firing rate of muscles are working properly. And I just remember going, the hell is he talking about? Like, I never saw any of this in school. And then, okay, I now am trying to get NASM certified and things like that back in my 20s. And it was very cookie cut, where it's like, oh, if somebody, their pelvis is posterior, they've got like that's their hamstrings too short, and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, yeah, but could it be from like something up above or something else? And so there was always this disjointed assessment model that I think the industry of fitness gets into, but then also in the therapeutic world, there's also these other flaws of assessment. And I'm sure that you see this most of the time, right?
How about every day, every single day, almost every client? Yeah.
That's it. So when you look at compensations, tell me what do you think is one of the most common, I guess, imbalances or common patterns that you see because of this modern day world that we're living in?
That's a good question. So I live near Silicon Valley, being in the San Francisco Bay Area. And of course, many people who live here work at computers and sit all day long, right? So there are two main compensation patterns that I see. One, head forward, the 50-pound head forward, where it's either the upper traps to the lats or the pec minor to the lats. That's a big one. And then the other, of course, is when you're leaning forward like that, it puts your psoas to sleep. So then you get lower back pain with the quadratus lumborum compensating for the psoas. So that I see almost on a daily basis because, as you mentioned, the lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Kids are using their phones, looking down. We're going to have, the Hunchback of Notre Dame Society before we know it.
Yeah.
With my apologies to Laurence Olivier, and then we're also seeing a tremendous increase in lower back pain. And again, if you sit with lousy posture, that's what you're going to get, right?
And I think,
You're forcing the brain to do something it doesn't want to do, and then it gets angry with you.
yeah, and I think that there's, when somebody says lousy posture, I don't think that they notice it, but sometimes I'm in Florida, sometimes I'm in New York, but when I'm in New York, it's like people watching Land of America, and you see these kids with their like this.
Wait a minute, everybody on the street is doing that. I don't know,
Why?
bump into each other all the time.
It's true, but
Fascinating.
we're almost, I feel like, if we were hunter-gatherers 100 years ago or earlier than that now, and then modern technology is allowing us to gain information much faster, but I think that there's a bit of a sacrifice that we're creating in this younger generation because of technology. And I think that for as heavy as my backpacks were as I was a kid and being forced to sit in a chair for 8 hours a day in school, we're training us into these dysfunctions. But now I feel like there's this real shelf in the cervical spine that I'm seeing more and more. And what David's talking about, like that kind of hunchback and even like a dowager's hump, where that the spine is actually becoming deformed. And so I'm seeing some of my young kids coming in with calf pain and Ausgleitschlager, the knee issues, hamstring strains. But if you just travel yourself on up, it's like, well, I can fix the bottom, but I've got to look at the whole form. And I think that's one of the things with NeuroKinetic Therapy that, David's alluding to. I hope you guys are hearing that he doesn't just look at a thing. Like, it's not like, aha, your psoas is short. It's a relationship. There are relationships that are common to patterns. And when you can pick up a pattern, now you can change the dysfunction, right?
Right. And those are, of course, generalities because there are always different things that happen within those compensation patterns. Everybody's got a unique compensation patterns, but those are the classic ones. But yeah, you asked me how I got into this. As a young man in the 60s, I got to understand how everything in the universe was connected to everything else. Once I saw that, I could not unsee it. And when I was at pre-med at Johns Hopkins, they were teaching the body as if it operated in parts that weren't connected to each other. And that whole philosophy made me want to puke. And despite my parents freaking out about me not going to medical school, I pursued what the universe told me to do, which is to figure out how everything is connected to everything else. And I followed my heart, led me on a pretty interesting journey, and here we are today. Following my heart has led to really an explosion in neuroscience. Of course, many other people have led to that explosion in neuroscience, but I just feel so good about the fact that following my gut and following in my heart led me to a career which I never imagined would be the way it is today. If you had said to me when I was young that my work would be all over the world, I would ask you what you were smoking, right?
Right.
But it happened, and it happened for a reason, and so I have to take that responsibility on and do as good a job as I possibly can. So hopefully I'm educating people through social media. The book is very basic. You can't really learn NKT from the book. You can get a kind of a glimmer. But that's my passion, and that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about your story and other pioneers in the industry that are really breaking the traditional confines of assessment, movement mechanics, and really trying to help people is I think many of us come to this place of, the universe is sort of the mirror of me. I think that we are 8 million humans are basically the universe experiencing itself in 8 million people or billion people, right? All over the world. And so there's this commonality that I find where you just realize that something just isn't right in so many of the dogmas of basic science. I mean, again, I went through that meltdown of you get really good with anatomy, you get really good with physiology and biology, but then applying it to a living human body and not a cadaver or not a model of a person, but a real person, that's where you really have taken this,
Yeah. And I get this question a lot, mostly from physical therapists trained in the United States. They go, trigger points don't exist. You can't find them in a cadaver. Yeah. Can you find a brain working in a cadaver?
Right. Is blood flowing in a cadaver? Yeah.
Seriously? That's a question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but I think, I've done many dissections in my career time, and I think cadaver dissections can really give you, it depending upon the cadaver. I mean, I've been working with Gil Hadley, I've taken Tom Myers, right? So, these people who really see the connections of things and trying to define connections, but even a cadaver is kind of like a selfie. It's just a static moment in time that really is a one concept and then you just have to separate yourself from that, because I always think that, as much as we can consider our bodies a form of matter, I think that when you think of particles and waves, particles are a mass, but waves are a possibility. And so in a human body, there are waves happening. There's movement and flow constantly happening. So taking that into consideration and seeing how the whole body reacts to acting on one subtle motion really is a dead giveaway for compensations and poor patterning, right?
Yeah. So in my early, before I put NeuroKinetic Therapy together, I was really into biomechanics.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's a great study. It's a great field, but again, I would keep bumping up against the same wall. People would come back to see me, even though I did all the proper biomechanical corrections that I could think of, and they'd still have these problems. And I said, something I'm missing. There is something I'm missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I read a book called The Neural Basis of Motor Control by Vernon Brooks. It's very dry. If you have a problem with too much saliva, I suggest that you read that. Or if you have insomnia, you can read that book as well. It is dry. Woo! And
Powerful though.
the ideas that I gleaned from that were indispensable to what I do now. He
Yeah.
really described it, how the brain works, how motor control works through the whole body.
Yeah.
And his teacher was a Russian scientist named Nikolai Bernstein, and he is the grandfather of neuroscience and motor control. And many of his theories are being proven true today. And
Yeah.
he did all this in the late 1920s and 1930s. So I'm taking that work and carrying it forward and, doing my own thing with it. But the fact is, this stuff's been around for a long time. We're not the
Exactly.
first ones to discover this.
That's right.
Who knows what ancient medicine did, because we
That's right.
learned it all.
Well, I think that's what's so great also about really the pioneers of this industry. Of course, you are so up there in these ways of thinking, is that you give credit where credit's due, realizing that, you found, like, when I discovered things, because people had discovered stuff, and then you discovered their discoveries, and suddenly you're going, wait a minute, like, that's
Oh,
so,
yeah.
I never thought of it that way. And I think that, and I think many of us, like, I started out when I was, a teenager, got introduced to a gym and these machines, and, you look at the picture on the machine and it says that's a deltoid exercise, and you're just going to lift this thing up and that deltoid is going to fire, until you realize, well, if my head is upright and my body is in a good position, my deltoid will fire properly. However, if I have a forward head carriage and I've got a little bit of elevation in my shoulder, now my nervous system is going, oh my God, your head's going to fall off, brace the neck. And now it becomes a neck activation. And then maybe the shoulders fire to follow. So I would love
Or
for you
maybe they don't.
Exactly, or they don't, right? So there's this idea that if I act upon a movement, that these muscles are the ones to activate, yet that's not necessarily so. And what I like about the way that you'll describe these things is, again, neurokinetic, is that motor control happens from a part of the brain that is actually firing motor units, motor neurons are firing and wiring together. So while I might do a bicep curl and see my bicep is contracting, there's an orchestration going on everywhere else to allow that to occur. And sometimes the timing of these pathways and these patterns there's roadblocks in them, right? So can you talk a little bit about that kind of idea, so people really understand that while they might exercise and do things, it may or may not give them the result that they're looking for?
Yeah, that's a good question. When you do something the wrong way for a long time, it becomes a habit. And habits are programmed into your cerebral cortex. It's kind of like riding a bicycle, right? You don't have to think about it, you just do it. So that is what happens when you get into a bad pattern. Like you were saying, you can do the biceps, but what if your brain goes, I don't trust that muscle very much. I'm going to compensate. I'm going to use my finger flexors. I'm going to use my wrist flexors. I'm going to use everything in that line that I can possibly use to avoid using the biceps. So that person could work out every day, and the next thing they know, they've got wrist pain because their biceps aren't working, right? And really, the simplified version of muscles has been agonist, antagonist. And yeah, that happens sometimes, but along with it comes functional opposites that work with it too, and synergists. So how do you say that a biceps is working unless you're able to take the parts, identify what they're doing in relationship to the biceps? And that's what the NeuroKinetic Therapy protocol is so good at, is, diagnosing these particular movement patterns, unraveling them to their smallest parts, correct that imbalance and then building it back up, and so that you can do, again, a full body movement pattern that is actually functional. Now, everybody walks around functionally dysfunctional. There's nobody who isn't functionally dysfunctional, right?
I really embrace my dysfunction.
I mean, the greatest athletes in the world are dysfunctional too, right?
Well, actually, they're probably I always say athletes, especially elite athletes, high performance athletes, they are in so many ways the most dysfunctional. They might be able to throw a ball at 120 miles an hour, but when you watch their gait pattern, it's a nightmare, right? It's a mess, right? But I don't want to unravel that neural patterning, right? Because that's what makes them really good at throwing accuracy, right? So again, I think with NeuroKinetic Therapy and understanding these kind of philosophies, you learn how to improve stability so that you maintain the velocity and the movement that you have, but without compensating to get there, which then I think really prolongs an athlete's career, which is a bigger concept, right?
Sure. And I never make corrections like that during the season.
Correct.
I always do that off season, because you can really mess somebody up. And I learned the hard way with that. I learned everything the hard way, apparently.
We all do. I think that's I guess it's trial and error, right? You start to, you learn something.
I made a lot of mistakes. Yeah. And, codifying the work now, I'm trying to help my younger students make less mistakes or different mistakes than I made, right?
Yes.
You can't prevent people from making mistakes. It's the only way we learn. Don't work on athletes and make major corrections during the season, because they'll be really mad at you if you do that, right?
That's right. It becomes your fault.
That's an off-season correction.
Yes, we've all done it at some point of my career. Early on, I remember, like working on, you watch girls soccer players with all the hyperextending knees, and so you try to activate their glutes, trying to get their rotation to actually function from up above the pelvis, but you don't want to do that in season, because then their strike leg just is off, because suddenly they're managing their center of gravity in a slightly different way. But again, what you're doing, and I think maybe you'll like this kind of analogy, is if neural pathways that are accurate are like superhighways, sometimes what our nervous system does is there's something goes awry, there's a compensating pattern, which is like a detour. And so instead of not going and creating movement, your nervous system kind of takes these side streets. So it gets you where you want to go. It's just not the most direct route. And then, it just becomes something where, kind of like if you live down in a suburb trying to get down to the city, instead of taking that highway Monday to Friday, you take those side streets to get downtown at the right time. But then on the weekend, somebody invites you downtown, and by habit, you keep taking those side streets, even though you could take the highway, right? So I think with NeuroKinetic Therapy and just this way of thinking about movement is that you are helping to rewire the neural pathways to improve where the involuntary stability occurs, so that biomechanically there are these better patterns that you're creating. So I hope everybody's hearing this, is that patterns are very much a thing of the universe, right? We're understanding and decoding, the periodic table is frequencies, right? People don't talk about that. Each element actually has a frequency to it. And in that frequency is mathematics that discovers patterns. And now you can correlate patterns to other things. So these neural correlates of movement are what in some ways we're decoding, right?
Yeah, and ancient languages like Sanskrit and Hebrew and Arabic, all the letters had frequencies, and they knew about that.
Yeah.
So this isn't anything new. People have been thinking about this stuff for a long time, right?
Yes.
So we forget, we remember. We forget, we remember.
That's right.
We like to say that a neural pathway becomes inaccessible to a person trying to do an exercise by the poor patterning that they've created in their brain. So the idea is then to allow the neural pathway to flow correctly. that we're kind of unblocking the dam and allowing the brain to have an efficient message sent to that part of the body. Now, one of the things that happens way too much is after a C-section, women get lower back pain and they're not being treated for it at all.
That's right.
Fortunately, in the world, this country too, women's health is number 2.
And it should not be that way anymore. We need more, listen, people, we need more female scientists. We need more people caring about women. I tell you, and because I want to keep going on this topic, is there are a lot of cellular research will not use female rats, and it's because estrogen gets in the way. And I was like, well, does estrogen get in the way of my assessments? And if that's the truth, maybe we should be considering it instead of using male rats to try to figure out female health issues. It just seems crazy that we think that way. But C-sections for sure, you know, they're
and we're doing a research project on C-sections as we speak.
Nice.
Which I hope to be able to present to the next Fascial Congress. It's a fascinating study about how the fascial distortions underneath the scar turn off the abs. And when the abs don't work, then the lower back hurts, right?
Right.
So it's a very simple process, but one that is ignored pretty much worldwide, that the fascial distortions made by surgery need to be corrected first, because the fascia is the skeleton for the sensory nerves, and the sensory nerves tell the brain where the hell that thing is in space, and then the brain and the sensory nerves can work together in a sensory motor relationship and get that information to the abdominal muscles, which is impossible when there is a roadblock as large as a C-section scar.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. I mean, that, you know, that's such a big topic that I talk about a lot with clients who come in with low back pain, where, you know, when they walk in, maybe they don't even have anything on their history and consent form about a cesarean, but you just look at them and you're like, did you have a cesarean? Like, yeah, 3. Well, let's test the scar and let's see if there's tissue tension to the spine from one side to the next. And it is so prevalent in women where it's just disregarded. But look, ladies, you know, they're cutting through every layer of sheath and fascia. And that 6th layer is completely inherently linked to psoas, your lumbar spine, all of the muscles in your back, your pelvic floor. There's no separation. And I think Gil Hedley has demonstrated this so well with that bag-like structure that you can really see. And so that's it, is, you know, you can plank, pike, twist yourself to death and 100 yourself to death and never get the glide ability back into the tissues. So, and I know that you talk a bit about fascia, and you've seen how the industry has kind of begun to really take more shape over the past 20 years. You know, I mean, Tom Findlay, God rest his soul, was such a pioneer in trying to bring researchers together to share their work, to try to bring more awareness of fascia as a system, not just as a tissue. And you sort of started to talk about this. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it, that, you know, it's also, it has a significant relationship with the sensory nervous system, because 250 million sensory nerves live in the fascial net. How do you get...
How do we ignore that is the question.
Yes. How can we possibly ignore this?
So my first cadaver, we scraped the fascia off the damn thing and threw it in a garbage.
Chuck it in the bucket.
It was garbage, right?
Yeah.
Which makes me kind of sick to my stomach now, but what can I do?
Yeah.
So I've really enjoyed connecting now with all the, you know, the fascia people, with Robert Schleip and Carl Estecco and Gil and you and everybody else, that I mean, to ignore this stuff is ridiculous. The importance of it in so many different ways, how it affects any number of systems. I'm not an expert in all that, but where I'd like to focus is on how it affects motor control.
Right.
So when I read that article years ago by Carla and others about the skin and the fascia and motor control and all that, it just blew my mind. And it opened me up to taking a look at all this stuff. So we talk about fascia a lot. We talk about fascia a lot in NKT because how can you not?
Well, and
all the sensory nerves inside of it. My God.
Right. And also, I mean, I think that when you think about this idea of in the NOE groups, the people who are super hell-bent and saying, no, it's all just the nervous system. It's just the nervous system. The nervous system is it. And I think to myself, well, it's a very myopic view. And while I am going to agree that the thing that you are trying to ultimately get to is changing the brain's connection to the body, to change even your mind about your body and about, changing the way that you think about your body. But fascia is able to morph and adapt, and it's in a constant state of changing. And it really presents itself as this constantly changing matrix of stability. It is what stabilizes everything inside of the body so that, how you're saying, the nervous system can get these super highways open, functioning well, so that even when you have sustained an injury or a cesarean, or it's just repetitive stress injury, which I call sudden chronic pain, that kind of pain that people say is unexplainable. It comes out of nowhere. I didn't do anything out of the ordinary. And I say, well, that's just accumulative tension and stress. So let's assess your body's ability to move. Let's see how you're moving. And then the question is it just the nervous system and the inhibitory aspects or the poor sensory motor pathways? Or could it be that the lack of glide ability in the fascial matrix is causing some of that sensory motor inhibition? Do you think it's a two-way street?
It's more than a two-way street. It's a gazillion-way street.
Yes.
And how they think that one thing causes everything else goes against the whole makeup of the universe. And so I really don't pay much attention to that, quite frankly, because it's not what it's all about. It's all about putting everything together and seeing how beautifully everything works. I always like to say to people, if your intellectual mind had to run your body for 10 seconds, we'd all be dead. Everybody who would try that would be dead. Oh, my heart, my lungs, my this, dead, right?
Yes.
So
It's
look,
remarkable what it does.
what's operating, this consciousness is operating and it's keeping us alive. And we don't have to think about it, thank God, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing how many things we take for granted, how many things are happening in our bodies that are not with our voluntary control or our conscious awareness. If I'm thinking my thinking self's awareness, but is consciousness necessarily my thinking self? And see, I love that you're shaking your head.
Descartes said that it was one of the worst things that ever happened to Western civilization. It screwed everything up.
Yeah.
I think, therefore I am. What a load of garbage.
Yeah.
You're not I am because of you thinking.
That's for sure. You don't even have to think very much. If anything, I think sometimes we're not listening to our body. When people also say, hey, all of a sudden, or, oh, I did this lunge and now my knee hurts me, like that movement really, messed me up. And I'm like, did it? Or was that maybe the straw that broke the camel's back because of all the poor patterning that you have in your body from the get-go, and now this was just like, cup runneth over. And that is kind of the thing about thinking, is that the action of development, when we develop as a kid, right? Nobody teaches you how to walk. Yes, you're mirroring your parents, but most of the impetus to get something is that you just have a desire to get that thing, whether it's a shiny object, you want to keep an eye on your mom, whatever it is, but that we are an observer in the process of observation on something that's being observed. So that part of us, that separation of my thinking self, to me is consciousness again. In my mind, I think that consciousness is a much bigger conversation that is probably everything but my thinking self.
Thank goodness it is.
There's
Goodness it is. Yeah.
so many things to unpack with that. So when
Yeah.
let's say that you're working with someone, have you ever had the experience where someone comes to you already telling you what their problem is, like
That's every day, Sue. Every day.
right? Like it's like
I call it WebMD-itis.
yes. Or maybe previous practitioner-itis, where I've had people tell me, well, my therapist told me that this was wrong, and then they tried to fix it and they couldn't, and they were like, sorry about that. I don't know. I've never had somebody who's, I've never been able to fix. And I think, well, that's the biggest problem right there, is that you've got somebody with such a big ego, they think they're going to fix you. I don't think that's how the body works. You heal yourself. They're a facilitator, and if they're a facilitator, then they're in the present moment of working on you at this time. And I think a lot of times the cookie cutter mentality, or aha, it's that one thing that's the problem. But I think that the encompassing modality of neurokinetic therapy, and also, like the way that I work in my practice also, is to look at the whole body. You can't just look at a thing, because then you miss all of the richness. But I think, what do you do with someone, let's say they come in with, they say, hey, I got an MRI and I've got some stenosis on the right side and I'm getting peripheral tingling. But then you look at them and you're like, well, your right ankle doesn't move and your right hip doesn't move. And now you want to work on the whole body, but they're like, look, I'm like spending a couple $100 every session. Like, when are we going to get to the neck? How do you get around the reality that if I've got peripheral tingling, that is a cervical issue, but I've got to make sure that my thoracic spine moves. I've got to make sure that the spine is moving below. Otherwise, I'm just going to stay hypermobile. And how do you communicate that with somebody who just wants you to work on their neck?
Well, fortunately for me, a lot of the people I see come in and they trust me to do whatever I need to do. That's the majority of the people that I work with. Now, there are some people, as you described, of course, and then I have to explain to them, show them video, show them, anatomy pictures and whatnot about why I'm doing what I do. So a lot of people like that. That makes them more comfortable. And stenosis, if it's a mild stenosis or even a moderate stenosis, doesn't need surgery necessarily if you can fix what's causing it. But once they get to the severe stenosis, that's a hardware problem. That ain't a software problem anymore.
Yeah.
And severe stenosis is causing peripheral neuropathy. Then they got to go see a neurosurgeon, right? And I have a wonderful neurosurgeon that I refer to in those cases. We can't just say we can fix everything, because we can't.
That's right. That's right.
I'm a software engineer. I'm not a hardware engineer.
Yeah.
So everybody's limited in what they can do based on what you're treating, right?
Yeah.
Like scoliosis, that's a huge, huge curve that they've had since they're 12, and now they're 52, and they want me to fix their scoliosis. Well, sorry.
Right. Maybe you lived a twisted life. Maybe that actually, start thinking about why your spine got twisted. And that's it, is, I think that's one of the things I try to explain to people. There's this idea they call ideal alignment. It's an idea more than a thing. That's what I say to people. There's this idea of joint centralization. In an ideal world, all of our joints align at their centers. And I'm going to define this for everybody, just in case like somebody wants to hear a definition of what I would say ideal alignment is. It's where all of our joints align at their centers so that sensory motor pathways can stay open and no one region of the body, no one joint will yield the demand of the whole body. That's kind of the theory of ideal alignment. The problem with
Yeah,
this is that,
you said that very well. Yeah.
thank you. You're like, but nobody, no human form is going to be in ideal alignment, not even a baby. You know, like sometimes I get kids who are all out of whack, right? Because of just how they're negotiating their big head, their big ribs, and their tiny pelvis over a real small base of support. And their body's just trying to balance it out. And so, you know, I have instructors sometimes who send pictures and they're like, what should I do with this child? And I'm like, well, I would send them to a hands-on therapist. But I would also just let them negotiate their body weight. They're so little, like let them continue, like see if they pick up their own patterns and give them time to actually hardwire some of these patterns before you go trying to tinker with it. But as an adult, if you have a scoliotic pattern, you almost have to embrace that that's your ideal alignment. That's your body's alignment. And so if we can become accustomed instead of alignment, what I always try to attune people to is tension, compression, mismanagement. And what I mean by that is that the fascial system manages tension and compression. And so if I can start to attune myself to where I lie down on the floor and I should be in a relaxed state. I'm resting all of my masses on the floor, but then I'll say to them, why don't you try to relax your thighs? And you see them go, ugh. They're like, God, I didn't know I was holding so much tension. I said, that's not your fascia. That's your brain not communicating and letting you chill out. So sometimes I think we work harder, not smarter, because people are constantly trying to corrective exercise their way back, but what they really just need to do is breathe and just breathing to expand the ribs can actually change everything, right? I mean, we need to go back to something so simple as to just chill the hell out.
For sure, for sure. And you know, with an advanced scoliosis, I don't try to fix the scoliosis because you would send that person into a tailspin. It would be a nightmare. But if I can make it more comfortable by giving them a little bit better way to rotate, a little bit better way to stabilize the pelvis, that is all I'm happy to do for that person.
Indeed.
Because when I was younger, I tried to make too many changes too fast, and it would put that person backwards. It was horrible. I learned a lot from my ego trying to fix stuff like that, right?
Yeah, well, and we know like with something, you know, if anybody has a scoliosis is listening to this, you know, as you get older, sometimes scoliotic patterns can get more scoliotic. And so the idea is that the younger you recognize that you have a tendency toward shortening on one side, elongating on the other, these types of techniques, the earlier on you get to understanding the mechanisms of stability, mobility, sensory motor control, sensory motor pathways, I think you have a bigger fighting chance. Otherwise, and this happened, I have a client who came in, she suddenly started having all of these stomach issues, and I do visceral manipulation, so somebody had her come to see me. And all I noticed was, well, you have a really tremendous scoliotic pattern. I wonder if perhaps the ribs are continuing to compress, and so the stomach can't move as well. Let's just go ahead and see if we can take some of the soft tissue, open it up. Let's teach you a stabilization to move you in the opposite direction and see if the stomach pains go away, because the doctors put her on Prilosec.
Yeah,
so we started working, and literally in 3 weeks, she calls me, she's like, I'm completely off that medication. My stomach pains are gone. I totally think that you targeted something that I don't think I had considered, that maybe as I'm getting older, I'm getting further into the pattern. I'm like, there it is. So I think what, you know, your work also reminds me of is just the idea to, again, think your body differently, to think different about the situation, and to don't get so hung up in one thing or other, but that you've got options, right?
So we know that pain 99.9% of the time is a symptom, and it's trying to tell us to look for the cause.
Right.
So Western medicine has failed miserably because they treat symptoms and not causes.
Yes.
And where does that get us if we're just treating symptoms all the time?
Get you into taking a lot of
Taking
pharmaceuticals.
Prolosec when somebody's stomach is being crushed by their scoliotic ribs. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not treating the cause. That's
Yeah.
treating the symptoms. So again, as a young person, I couldn't take that. That philosophy did not fly with me very well.
Mm-hmm.
And the work is all about finding cause. Let's find the cause.
Yeah.
The symptoms are important. You need to work on the symptoms, right? You need to help.
Right.
But you can't say that a stomach problem you take Prolosec for. Some people need Prolosec for their stomachs, and some have scoliosis, right? And some have hiatal hernias, and some have all this and that.
That's
And
right.
you have to take it back to where it all got started. And if you don't have a curious mind, you don't like solving puzzles, go ahead, treat the symptoms, forget the cause. But if you like puzzles, and I love puzzles, then I'm always looking for how everything is connected to everything, right?
Yeah.
So when people come in, the first thing I do is I listen quite intently to what they're telling me. And if I listen carefully enough, they tell me everything I need to know so that I can go ahead and work on them. But if you give people, I think the average doctor, I read this study, gives you 18 seconds to talk before they interrupt you. If you give people some time and listen, then you have less to do because you already know what to do, right? They know.
Yeah. Attuning yourself to being a good listener, I think, is one really important thing about being a good practitioner. And many years ago, in taking visceral work, I remember Gail Wexler saying, palpate, don't manipulate, feel and follow, don't initiate, as a starting place for when you're working on clients. And that has always stuck with me as allowing the body to tell you what to do, and use the subjective information that your client is giving you, but be listening for those tones of what they're saying rather than the words sometimes, how they're saying something, how their body maybe gets tense as they start telling you a story. Then I become a very good question asker, right? I mean, that's kind of what we are. We're investigators more than we're going to put somebody, like, aha, here's the problem, right?
Yeah, right. That's right. So it's a beautiful process. Very intimate and beautiful process if you really allow it to happen.
That's right.
And I enjoy doing that very much.
Well, and you've also trained, how many NKT therapists are out in the world right now?
Well, I think we've trained over 12,000, but I don't know how many of them are actively doing it around the world, but there's thousands of people, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would think so. And that's it. I mean, sometimes we take the information in, and because we're not really just working on that one modality, to which I think a lot of the top NKT therapists, when I talk to them, they have other techniques that they do, but much like I do, if I'm working on something, I might do one of those tests of the glutes. I might do one of the tests because it just makes the process go faster, because I'm ruling out things that aren't the problem, and that gets me closer to the cause. And I think that that's what this work is so powerful.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful assessment technique when you're looking at, biomechanical imbalances, right? It really is a wonderful way to get to the cause.
Indeed.
And people use it in all different kinds of ways. I don't want robots running around doing what I do, right?
Right.
I want people to take it and make it their own. That's why it's grown around the world, because it's not a dogma. It's like, integrate this into what you already do.
Yeah.
That's what we want to see people do.
Yeah.
And I want this to outlive me. So I don't want it to be about me. I don't want it to be about dogma or anything like that, right?
Indeed.
I want it to be about the excitement that therapists get from exploring how people got the way they are, and then being able to fix it, right?
Yeah.
Or at least give people the tools they need themselves to fix it. That has been my life's work, Sue. That's really the essence of it right there.
And an incredible, I mean, I just think, everybody that I talk to that takes NKT, they just love the work. Love it. So I've got
That's
one.
fun.
I've got one
That's
last big
fun.
question. I've got one last big question for you, and this one I ask all of my anybody that I interview.
Yeah.
If you could tell someone something that you know that most people don't know anything about, but if they did, it might actually change the very course of their lives. What is it?
Oh, wow.
I know
That's
it's such a.
a question. That's a juicy question. I think I would like to say we learn from failure. I have students in their 50s who are kinesthetic learners who have suffered miserably through their whole education process, thinking they were stupid. No, they're not stupid. They're a different kind of learner. And we get people learning all three ways, right? So these kinesthetic people, many of whom are attractive to the bodywork world, right? Because it feels good to them and they get good at it, right?
Mhm.
When it comes into a classroom and they've been told how many times when they go to school how stupid they are and you'll never amount to anything. My favorite is when somebody in their 50s comes up to me and hugs me and starts crying because they no longer feel stupid. So I want to say to all the people out there who learn differently, you're not stupid, you're just not educated well. And
That's
it's not
right.
your fault. Your
Yeah.
education did not address what you need, the way you need to learn. So any teacher that calls any student stupid is a lousy teacher.
Is not a teacher. Yeah, and I think that you're saying something also really powerful. You know, I always say if you're not failing sometimes, you're not trying hard enough. You're not really getting into the weeds of the problem, right? And I think when you just always know everything, you have all the answers, you have all the solutions, it yeah, it kind of, you just sort of think, well, okay, but I don't know if that's really the truth, right? No.
and and the brain learns from failure.
Yeah.
There is no possibility of learning unless we fail. It opens up our brain to new learning. That is what school has driven out of the education system, is that we don't let kids fail and learn. We 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 reward them for success, and you learn hardly anything from success, except maybe you memorize really well, right?
Yeah.
But if you really want to learn, get your hands dirty because you're going to be on your ass all the time from that, right?
That's right.
So let it go. Be happy to fail. And your brain will cooperate with you and your whole body will be happy about it too, right?
I love that. So true. And so,
Yeah.
do you, David, are you still doing live trainings? Do you come in and do live trainings with your teachers? Yeah.
I do the live trainings here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but once in a while I'll go somewhere else and do a training. But I've trained people all over the world to be I have teachers all over the
Yeah.
world. And these young people are doing a great job. And frankly, I'm burned out on travel. I did so much travel in my life. I mean, I do love to travel, of course, but do I really want to fly to India? As much as I'd love to go to India and teach, I have somebody wonderful there because I don't want to get my 70-year-old body on an airplane ride for 24 hours. That
Yeah.
just doesn't sound good anymore, right?
Indeed.
I can't do it anymore. I can't. And
Yeah.
knowing that I can't do it, I'm happy to give it to others so that
Do
they
what
can
you
do it.
have. Yeah. I mean, your teachers are fantastic. And, again,
Yeah.
the work that you've done is just so pioneering. So, David, how can people find out more about neurokinetic therapy and learn a little bit more about your work?
Well, this is really complicated. My website is neurokinetictherapy.com. I
Perfect.
know that's a real twist on it, right?
Okay.
And you can follow me on social media. I have a pretty big presence on Facebook and Instagram. It's not hard to find me.
Indeed.
And always posting cases that I've done with clients. These are, everyday kind of things. And I like to post interesting research articles that go with, what I'm doing and just trying to get people excited and educated about the possibilities that therapy can do. And so, it really has rung a bell with a lot of people around the world.
Yeah.
And of course, it's gotten a lot of people mad at me too, but that's all part of the process, right?
Well,
If you're not putting something out there and somebody doesn't criticize you, you're not doing it right, right?
that's right. I would say the exact same thing. You're always going to have the naysayers, the
Of
poo-pooers,
course, of
the
course. And
ones
there
that
are
tell you.
plenty of them on social media.
Sure.
They're there.
Well,
But
I think you post so many great things on social media. I love when you come through my feed. Unfortunately, my personal page got hijacked. I was apparently I was impersonating myself last year, and so they took my 20,000 people away from me, and that made me
oh
start over.
no.
It's so heartbreaking, but you do what you do. And so, again, this is who we are. We're just constantly trying to share the wisdom, share the knowledge. And I just really appreciate everything that you do. I think you're just a
Yeah,
fantastic educator, such an easy, down to earth educator, also, and easy to learn from. And I just really appreciate, everything. And even the long ago when I brought you in to work with Steve Kerr with me after
yeah,
that surgery and just all those terrible things. Just wonderful to connect always with you.
yeah. Again, always a pleasure.
Yeah.
I just remember lunches in New York and getting to know each other, and that
Yes.
was that was fun.
Yes. Well, hopefully I'll come out to the Bay Area. Next time I'm out there, I'm going to come and visit you and Rose. And again,
Please.
thanks for everything that you do. And for those of you watching, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you subscribe to our page, share this with your community, and learn a little bit more about NeuroKinetic Therapy. It's really a life-changing methodology, and I think that you'll love learning more. So enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Dave.